My son emptied every penny from my account and escaped to Paris with his wife and her mother. I simply smiled and waited. 3 days later, his desperate call came through. "Mama, what have you done?" My justice was finally served. The day I needed strength the most was when my child took everything without leaving even a goodbye note. Margaret Maggie Thompson sat frozen in her threadbare recliner, the same chair she'd purchased when David turned 8, bought with her first decent wages from housekeeping in Beverly Hills mansions. Before her, the phone screen displayed a notification that turned her blood to ice. Current balance, $0. She stared at those numbers, reading them over and over until they burned into her memory. Her fingers shook, not from her 70 years of life, but from something much deeper, that hollow feeling when your soul comprehends what your heart desperately denies. She dialed the bank. An automated system answered, then a human representative who seemed detached from her panic. They explained that online transfers had been executed, wire transfers draining over $85,000. Every dollar represented years of sacrifice, her entire life's accumulation, her only protection against uncertainty. "Where did my money go?" she whispered, her voice fractured, knowing the answer but needing confirmation from another voice. "The funds were transferred to an account registered under David Michael Thompson," came the emotionless reply. "Would you like to report this?" "As fraud?" the representative asked with professional indifference. Maggie said nothing. She ended the call without another word. The house fell into complete stillness. Only the kitchen clock's steady rhythm and a flickering hallway bulb disturbed the quiet. Outside, children's laughter echoed from the street, oblivious to the devastation unfolding within these walls. The landline's sharp ring pierced the silence, the ancient phone she maintained out of stubborn habit. "Hello," she answered, her voice completely flat. "Maggie, honey, have you seen David's social media posts?" came the enthusiastic voice of Patricia, her longtime neighbor. "He's living it up in Paris, eating at fancy restaurants with his wife." And her mother. Good gracious, what a lifestyle they're enjoying. "They look absolutely glamorous." Maggie's throat constricted. Her spirit seemed to abandon her body momentarily. She walked deliberately to her bedroom, retrieved the old smartphone from her drawer, and searched for her son's profile. She wasn't comfortable with technology, but she followed his life from a distance, like watching through frosted glass at an existence that no longer included her. There he stood, David, her only child, the baby she'd delivered through agony, and raised single-handedly after his father abandoned them for a younger woman, the same son for whom she'd sold her parents' inheritance so he could attend university. He was grinning broadly, champagne glass raised, wearing an expensive suit, embracing his wife Sarah and her mother Linda, who had always treated Maggie like something unpleasant stuck to her shoe. The photo's caption read, "Paris, my fresh start. I've earned this." In the comments, Sarah had added, "Dreams do come true for those who take action. Grateful to my sweet mother-in-law," complete with money emojis. Maggie didn't weep. She didn't rage or destroy anything. She stood motionless, holding the phone like a burning coal. Then, with nobody watching, she smiled. But this wasn't her usual gentle smile. This was something entirely different, as if she'd finally understood a truth she'd been avoiding for years. Thousands of miles away, beneath Parisian clouds and along ancient cobblestone paths, David raised his glass without any trace of guilt. "You see, Sarah," he said, savoring costly wine. "Taking the money was brilliant. She's ancient anyway. Better. We enjoy it before it disappears into medical expenses." Linda, her mother, released a cruel cackle. "Foolish old woman. She probably doesn't even know what the internet is. She would never have done anything worthwhile with that cash." David remained silent, gazing at the Eiffel Tower with sparkling eyes. Something stirred uncomfortably in his chest, but he suppressed it, just as he'd learned during childhood when hunger gnawed at him and his mother would promise, "Be patient, sweetheart. Tomorrow will be better. The walls of Maggie's home seemed to age overnight. Everything remained in its proper place, yet nothing felt familiar. The shelves displayed photographs of David as a toddler in his elementary school uniform, graduation day from college. Every sacrifice had been for him. At 18, she'd pawned her wedding ring for his senior year expenses. At 23, she'd signed over the family property her father had left her. At 30, she'd contributed to his wedding costs, despite Sarah's obvious disdain. Maggie had cooked his meals, laundered his clothes, and cleaned up his messes, while he steadily drifted away. "Mom, you don't understand the modern world," he'd say dismissively. "Things work differently now. Sarah and I have ambitious plans, and you need to respect that. You'll always hold a place in my heart, but you can't control my life forever." A week before discovering the theft, Maggie had attempted to visit David at his apartment in West Hollywood. She'd prepared a container of her legendary fried chicken and cornbread, made from scratch. She pressed the buzzer. Nobody answered. She waited in the blazing sun, sitting on a concrete bench for 2 hours until the building manager approached. "Are you here for Mr. David Thompson?" "Yes, I'm his mother." "Ah, well, I have strict instructions. Not to admit you without prior approval." Maggie swallowed hard. "And why is that?" "I couldn't say, ma'am. Those are my orders." She walked home alone. She didn't take the bus. She needed the air against her face, even though it was hot and polluted. She thought about every meal she'd skipped, every overtime shift worked, every penny saved for her son. That evening, Patricia visited with apple pie and coffee. "You've always been resilient, Maggie. Don't let this destroy your spirit. David is still young. Perhaps he'll gain wisdom." Maggie sighed, her gaze distant. "Do you think children ever feel remorse, Patricia?" "Absolutely. When their mother is gone, they realize everything." "Well, I hope he realizes before it's too late." "What will you do now?" Patricia asked. Maggie looked up. In her eyes was something new, something that hadn't existed before. "I'm going to smile just like they taught me." Patricia frowned. "Smile? What do you mean?" "I've shed enough tears, Patricia. Now I'll smile in silence because I have nothing left to lose. And when a woman has nothing left to lose, she becomes formidable." Meanwhile, evening was descending over Paris. David was emerging from the shower when he overheard Sarah's voice on the balcony, speaking into her phone. "Yes, we succeeded. The old fool never suspected anything. The money's secure. Tomorrow we establish the Spanish account and dump David. Obviously, he believes we're partners. What an idiot." David froze. He couldn't move. He felt ice water in his veins. He said nothing. He returned to the bedroom as if he'd heard nothing. He lay beside Sarah, who pretended to sleep. He closed his eyes, but something fundamental had shifted, and he didn't yet realize that worse was coming. Back in South Central Los Angeles, Maggie was brewing chamomile tea. The night was oppressive. Street lamps flickered weakly. Outside, stray cats fought over garbage scraps. Inside, she retrieved her journal, the one where she recorded recipes she'd never had time to prepare. She wrote something in her shaky handwriting. "This is not an ending. This is the beginning of my silence, and my silence will inflict more damage than any scream." Then she closed the journal, went to bed, and for the first time in ages, she slept without tears. While she rested in her modest home, her son in a Parisian hotel suite checked his phone. He found a banking notification. "Account frozen due to suspicious activity." "What?" he muttered, staring at the screen. The first crack had appeared, and David had no idea that his mother, in her silence, had already begun to act. Sometimes, pain doesn't announce itself with noise. Sometimes pain observes, calculates, and waits for the perfect moment, and that moment was just beginning. The night hadn't completely faded from South Central. That humid thickness still hung between rusted roofs and cracked sidewalks. Maggie rose at dawn, her joints protesting as they did each morning. But this time, she didn't feel elderly. Something fresh was pulsing within her. It wasn't anger or sorrow. It was a resolve her soul had never known. While heating water on the gas burner, she stared into the blue flame. The kettle's whistle transported her decades back to the first day she understood what solitude meant. She was 14 when she began cleaning houses in the Pacific Palisades, a girl with uneven braids, dark skin, and hands roughened by harsh detergents. By that age, she knew every stain remover by name and how to press an employer's shirts without creasing them. At night, when she returned home, her mother was already asleep. Her absent father had run off with a bartender. Maggie didn't cry, she just swallowed her pain and rose before sunrise the next day to return to work. At 17, she became pregnant with David. His father was a boy, 3 years her senior. He promised marriage, promised to rescue her from that life. Their relationship lasted 8 months. The day he learned the baby was male, he vanished. He left with a woman who sold beauty products and never looked back. Maggie didn't cry. She just set her jaw, tied her headscarf tighter, and searched for more houses to clean. She raised David alone, carrying him on her back while she scrubbed other people's laundry. When he started walking, she taught him to play with bottle caps as if they were toy cars. They had no toys, but they had stories. No refrigerator, but they had warm soup. No television, but they had lullabies she sang until he fell asleep. He was her entire universe. When David turned 6, one of Maggie's clients offered to pay for his private elementary school tuition if she agreed to work full-time and live on the property. Maggie didn't hesitate. She left her house, lived in the employer's garage apartment, and every weekend she crossed the city to see her son. She never arrived empty-handed. Sometimes a new pencil, sometimes just a cookie, but always with a heart, ready to hear whatever David wanted to share. Years passed, and David matured. Maggie struggled to learn proper penmanship, her hand trembling as she signed school documents as his guardian. She learned to decipher medical prescriptions and later bank statements. She couldn't write eloquently, but she understood enough to avoid being taken advantage of, or so she believed. At 16, David told her, "Mom, when I become successful, the first thing I'll do is buy you a house where the wind doesn't blow through the walls." She replied without hesitation, "Don't buy me anything, son. Just don't abandon me." Then came college. Maggie sold the only land her father had left her, a small plot in rural Louisiana where she'd always dreamed of building a tiny cottage. She sold it for less than its worth because David needed enrollment money, and as always, she didn't hesitate. "My son will become an accountant," she proudly told her neighbors. "He's going to escape this life." And he did escape, but not as she'd imagined. It was during his 3rd semester that he met Sarah, a girl with salon-perfect hair, manicured, nails, and a commercial smile. From the first moment Maggie saw her, she felt unease in her stomach. Not from jealousy or envy, but because this woman had the expression of someone who only knew how to take, never give. Sarah came from a family that pretended to possess more than they did. Her mother, Linda, wore counterfeit designer clothes and spoke as if she'd been educated in Europe. The first time they visited Maggie's house, they subtly wrinkled their noses. "What an interesting color choice. The walls have such a rustic charm," Linda said with thinly veiled sarcasm. Sarah, observing the kitchen, made a comment under her breath that Maggie would never forget. "I can't imagine how David survived here. This resembles a homeless shelter, not a home." Maggie smiled as she always did, but something shattered inside her. Years passed, and Sarah gained influence. First, she suggested that Maggie visit less frequently, then that she avoid offering opinions on their decisions, then that she skip certain family gatherings because she didn't belong. David, confused and infatuated, gradually distanced himself. One evening, already living with Sarah, David visited his mother. It was the last time he did so, unannounced. She prepared beef stew with dumplings, his favorite dish. "Mom, Sarah says you're too involved in our relationship, that you don't allow us to grow as a couple." "I just want your happiness, son," Maggie said, watching her food grow cold. "I don't need your protection anymore," he replied, as if that would wound her. "I'm a man now, and men must forget who shaped them into men." Maggie didn't cry. She simply stood, cleared the table, and told him to take the remaining stew home. The following months brought a series of gentle rejections. Sarah began managing David's finances, convinced him to change banks, and requested that he not share everything with his mother. According to her, Maggie was a simple woman who wouldn't comprehend contemporary life. David, caught between ambition and emotional manipulation, agreed. Maggie began noticing irregularities: a bank receipt that didn't match, a statement that never arrived, a life insurance policy she didn't remember signing. That's when she decided to contact William. William was her first love, a childhood neighbor, who had practiced law for decades and now lived alone in an apartment filled with old documents and memories. She approached him without revealing much. "William, how can I determine if someone is using my identity for suspicious activities?" "Are you in trouble, Maggie?" "No, but I feel like my son is no longer my son." William studied her carefully, asked for the few papers she possessed, and spent weeks reviewing transactions, documents, and transfers until one evening he invited her to his apartment. "Maggie, your son listed you as a co-signer on a joint account. You never signed anything, but the signature appears genuine." "But I can barely write more than my name. They forged your signature, and they've been withdrawing money gradually. For 6 months." Maggie said nothing. She took the papers, placed them in her purse, and left in silence. That night, the pain prevented sleep. Not because of the money, but because of the truth. Her son hadn't merely been manipulated. He had become an active participant in the betrayal. He had robbed his own mother. In the days that followed, Sarah and Linda organized the Paris trip. David, without steady employment, sold his car and then suggested using Maggie's savings. "It's family money," Sarah declared. "Besides, your mother isn't going to use it." "Don't be ridiculous." "I'm not sure. It's everything she has." "And why is she hoarding it? You're her son. You're not stealing. You're just claiming your inheritance early." David hesitated, but he did it. One night from his home computer, he transferred all the money. He did it quickly, without much consideration, like someone wanting to extract a tooth without anesthesia. He finished, took a deep breath, closed the laptop, and didn't look back. Maggie discovered the theft the next day. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply wrote a sentence in her journal. "My son didn't die, but the mother in me did." From that moment, everything changed. Her body continued aging, but her spirit hardened. She began walking differently, her spine straighter. She started making calls, checking emails, visiting offices. Something was being prepared. While in Paris, David strolled the stone streets, believing he had gained something. In south-central Los Angeles, his mother was weaving the trap that would return everything they had stolen from her. And Sarah was already planning how to disappear without a trace. What David didn't know was that Maggie was no longer the woman he remembered. That woman had died. In her place remained a wounded mother, but an alert one. And when a wounded mother awakens, there is no obstacle she won't overcome. The betrayal no longer caused pain. What hurt was the certainty of having been invisible, of having been exploited, of having been erased as if she had never mattered. But Maggie was not willing to disappear quietly, because what mothers keep silent about can also destroy. Maggie said nothing. Not that time, nor the next, nor any time after. Her silence was no longer the kind that bleeds internally. It was a sharp silence, one that observes, records, and calculates. The words dried up in her throat as if they no longer served any purpose. Because when a mother understands that she has been replaced by a pretense, she no longer screams. She transforms. David didn't notice the difference, or he didn't want to notice it. He was too occupied living the life he had envisioned, a life that didn't smell like fresh laundry or morning coffee, a life where the voice that awakened him didn't say, "My precious boy." Instead, "Sir," clean, elegant, and hollow. Sarah settled into his world as if she had always owned it, and he, enchanted, allowed her to. He was fascinated by how she spoke with words Maggie never used, how she moved gracefully in high heels, how she referred to things as if everything belonged to her. But behind her easy laughter and filtered photographs was a subtle, cruel, and precise machine. Sarah knew what she wanted, and she wanted it quickly. A reputation, a surname, an account, and a man who could sustain her facade. The first comments came disguised as humor. "Darling, why does your mother always need to have an opinion about everything?" "I don't want our children growing up surrounded by poverty-level thinking," she said, while painting her nails in the living room. David released an uncomfortable laugh. "It's not that she wants to have opinions, it's just difficult for her to relinquish control. She's always been like that." "It's not control. It's pity disguised as love. Women like your mother think they're martyrs for raising children alone, but they don't realize that the past doesn't give them the right to drag others down. I don't want that for you or for me or for our children." Gradually, Sarah began deciding when they could visit Maggie and when they couldn't. First, it was that they were busy, then that it was better to meet in public places, and finally, that she didn't feel comfortable entering Maggie's house because it smelled stale. David accepted everything, and every time Maggie asked why they didn't visit her as often, he lowered his head. "We have too many responsibilities, Mom. You know, work, wedding preparations." Maggie only nodded, but there was no longer any innocence in her eyes. She was beginning to assemble pieces, like someone carefully stitching a torn fabric. Linda, Sarah's mother, didn't take long to become involved, never with direct insults, but always with carefully chosen phrases designed to sound educated, but with just enough edge to wound. "Ms. Margaret, forgive me if I'm too direct, but haven't you ever considered relocating to a more respectable neighborhood? I mean, you're getting older now. This area isn't safe for someone your age, and with that money you have saved, you could purchase something better, correct?" Maggie looked Linda in the eye. She didn't blink, didn't speak, but something inside her cracked. That day, she understood that it wasn't that they wanted her distant. It was that they never wanted her close. One Sunday during a family dinner organized by Sarah, Maggie decided to speak to her son. She waited for the moment Linda went to the bathroom and Sarah was distracted by her phone. She looked at David with the same love as always, but her voice no longer trembled. "Son, are you certain this woman is right for you? Have you noticed how she looks at you when you're not paying attention? How she speaks about me?" David swallowed. Sarah looked up from her phone. Linda had just emerged from the bathroom. The atmosphere shifted like when a storm approaches. And then David exploded. "Enough! Mom, you're jealous because I have another woman in my life now. You won't admit it, but you think it. You never accepted anyone else being important to me." Maggie didn't defend herself. She didn't even flinch. She simply lowered her gaze to her plate, set down her fork, and in that silence, she knew she had lost him. When they said goodbye that afternoon, nobody embraced her. Upon arriving home, she carefully removed her shoes, as if she didn't want to disturb anyone, even though she was alone. She sat on her bed and thought about the last time her son had said, "I love you," without her asking him to. She couldn't remember. The following weeks were hell disguised as routine. Sarah and Linda began visiting David more at his office. They brought him lunch, discussed business, and suggested investments. One day, Sarah requested access to his account. so she could better organize household expenses. "Trust me," she said, removing her blouse in front of him. "Or aren't we a team?" David, trapped between desire and foolishness, said yes as always. Maggie, meanwhile, didn't remain idle. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't know how to prove it. That's when she reached out to her neighbor, Beverly, a woman who had been an accountant for 20 years at a medical company and was now retired, teaching neighborhood children arithmetic. "Beverly, I need you to explain something to me." "How can I tell if someone is tampering with my accounts?" Beverly frowned. "Your son?" "Yes. Do you have access to your bank statements?" "They don't come to me anymore. And transfers? I've never made one. I don't even know how to do that." For several nights, Beverly taught Maggie how to access the bank portal on her phone, how to review transactions, and how to identify deposits and withdrawals. The first time she saw the list of transactions, Maggie felt the world collapsing. Large amounts, recent dates, transfers that coincided with the days David visited or asked for some document, money leaving without explanation. "He had access. He asked me for it to handle some paperwork. He said it was for insurance." "Maggie, it's not paperwork, it's theft." Her heart broke too, but she didn't cry. Instead, she asked for a notebook and began recording every single transaction: day, time, amount. Every stolen dollar had a name attached to it. One Friday night, when everything seemed lost, Beverly showed her something else. "See this transaction? They signed your name here to activate a joint account, but the signature isn't yours." "It's a clumsy forgery." Maggie touched the screen as if touching an open wound. "They didn't even bother to hide it." "What are you going to do?" Maggie closed her phone, took a deep breath, and said, "Nothing. Not yet." Meanwhile, in Paris, David began to feel uneasy. Not from guilt, but because Sarah no longer looked at him the same way. She had changed. She no longer kissed him with passion. She spent hours on her phone laughing to herself. And Linda no longer bothered to pretend. She tolerated him. One night, he overheard a conversation between them while pretending to sleep. "It's finished. Why keep pretending? As soon as we return, we're liquidating everything and abandoning him. And if he discovers the truth? He's slow. He won't even notice. And if he does, so what? The old woman is going to die anyway. Who is going to defend him?" Maggie from Los Angeles began to move with precision. She visited a bank office, requested complete statements, printed them, and placed them in folders. Then she went to the public registry to inquire if there were properties under her name that she didn't remember signing. There she discovered something even worse. David had attempted to register her house as a shared investment property using altered documents. He didn't succeed due to a technical error, but he had tried. That day, Maggie didn't go straight home. She walked to an old church at the back of the neighborhood, not to pray, just to sit on the bench and look at the altar. "Give me patience, God, not to forgive him, but not to destroy him with my own hands." Silence enveloped her. When she returned, she turned on the radio, played a jazz song, and began to sew. But what she was sewing wasn't clothing. It was revenge. The seeds of ingratitude were already planted, and they were sprouting. The harvest was near. Maggie knew it. She felt it in her bones, in the way the wind blew through the cracks in the door, as if coming to warn her that everything that had been buried in silence would soon emerge. The pre-dawn hours felt lighter on her. The cold no longer bothered her. She just counted the days, not with anxiety, but with strategy, with calmness, like someone sharpening a blade slowly, knowing they will use it at the precise moment. One morning, while sweeping the living room, with the old straw broom that had lasted so long, she decided to move the armchair to clean underneath. Beneath it were dust, tiny papers, a dried pen, and a torn, badly folded white envelope tucked into a recycled plastic bag. She was going to throw it all away without looking, but something inside her screamed at her to check. First, she opened the bag. Inside was a document. She read it twice without fully understanding what it said. It listed her full name, her address, and a signature resembling hers. Then she read the header. Last Will and Testament. She felt something constrict her chest. She sat on the floor with the document spread across her legs and read it again. It was a will where she supposedly bequeathed her house and savings to David in case of her death. And at the bottom, a signature. Her signature forged. She felt the silence of the house more than ever. Only the clock's ticking and the distant barking of a dog broke the quiet. She didn't cry. She wasn't surprised, but this time something did break inside her. It wasn't the betrayal. It was the confirmation. She called William. "Come over." "What happened?" "I found what you needed to see." 2 hours later, William was sitting in her kitchen with the document in hand. He read it carefully, shaking his head in denial. "This is not only illegal, it's dangerous. If he had filed it, you could have lost the house without ever knowing. Do you think it was him?" William remained silent. He placed the paper on the table. "This isn't your signature, Maggie, and you have no idea how to draft a will. It's obviously not yours. The most serious part is that this is a draft, and if there's a draft, there may have been a real attempt to file it." Maggie stared at her own wrinkled hands, stained by the years, but still steady. She remembered the day she finally made the last mortgage payment on the house. 30 years of effort, reheated meals, worn shoes, working in the blazing heat, cleaning up other people's messes, enduring employers' shouting, all to have something of her own, something nobody could take away. "He wanted to kill me on paper," she said without raising her voice. William looked up. He didn't know if it was a metaphor or literal truth. The silence between them was so long that the boiling of the coffee on the stove became the only sound. In the kitchen. "And now, what are you going to do?" Maggie smiled, the same smile David didn't know how to read in time. "Now I'm going to bury him, but alive." Not even 3 days had passed since that discovery when she received an unexpected call from Dr. Martinez, the internist at the health clinic where Maggie had occasional checkups. "I need you to come in, Ms. Margaret, today if you can." She felt her legs tremble. She walked to the medical center with the same dignity with which she had faced everything in her life. She entered the office in her usual clothing, her scarf tied tight, and the notebook where she recorded every medication. The doctor greeted her kindly but without hope. In his gaze was a compassion that smelled of farewell. "We conducted new blood tests, and the results are not good." She didn't respond. She just looked at him expecting what she already knew. "You have leukemia, ma'am. It's in an advanced stage. It pains me to tell you this way, but there's no time for pleasantries. Your immune system is compromised. We estimate you have about 6 months." Maggie froze. She stared at a fixed point on the wall, a small bird-shaped water stain. Not a single tear, not a single question. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand what it costs me to die with dignity." The doctor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "There are options. We can start chemotherapy, but it's uncertain you'll respond. The treatment is aggressive and expensive." "Does it make my death faster?" "Not necessarily." "Then no, I don't like the idea of death finding me in a hospital gown." The doctor didn't know what to say. He had never seen anyone receive news of their own death with such composure. Maggie stood up, took her purse, and before leaving the office, she turned to him. 6 months is enough. For what I have to do, it's more than enough." She walked back home, not because she couldn't afford transportation, but because she needed to feel the city. She wanted every step to take her back to her roots, her history, her purpose. She crossed the street where she was once almost hit by a car while taking David to preschool. She passed the market where she worked cleaning restrooms for $40 a day. She waved to Mr. Rodriguez, the fruit stand man, who had no teeth, but a good memory. When she arrived home, She went straight to her room. She pulled out a wooden box hidden under the bed. Inside was her notebook with notes, clippings, receipts, unsent letters, and an old envelope where she kept the only photo she had of David as a child when he still slept hugging her leg. She looked at it for a long time, then turned on the stove, put water to boil, and as the steam rose, she murmured to herself, "No more praying now. The work begins." The first thing she did was go with William to file a preemptive complaint, not as a mother, but as a citizen. They reported the forgery of her signature, the attempt to appropriate property, and attached the evidence. Then they requested the temporary freezing of the bank account from which David had withdrawn the money. To achieve this, they used a clause that allowed the stopping of financial movements if elder financial abuse was suspected. It wasn't easy, but William knew the loopholes. He had lost faith in the law years ago, but for Maggie, he was willing to dust off his profession. "Are you ready for what's coming?" he asked as they signed the papers. "I was born ready. I just didn't know it." After that, Maggie went to the store, bought a new notebook bound in red, and started writing what would be her final record. Not one for weeping, but one for documentation. On the first page, she wrote, "To my son, David, I delivered you from my womb with pain. I gave you my life with love, and you stripped away my dignity without hesitation. This is not revenge. It is justice, and justice is all I have left to die in peace." Meanwhile, in Paris, David and Sarah continued to pretend to be happy. They uploaded daily photos, made videos with filters, and showed off plates of food they couldn't even pronounce. But the tension was becoming more evident. Sarah no longer shared the bed. Linda spent all her time on her phone. And David felt something slipping away, like an internal alarm that wouldn't stop ringing. One night, while searching his email for a flight confirmation, he found a hidden folder. It was an automatic backup of Sarah's messages with another person. At first, he thought it was spam, but when he opened it, he read what he shouldn't have. "Sarah, we almost have everything. The fool doesn't suspect a thing. Contact. And the account? Sarah. Done. As soon as we return, we're leaving him. Contact. What if he finds out? Sarah. I don't care. Let him suffer. I'm not staying with someone who smells like a traumatized single mom." David felt his stomach drop. He closed. The computer said nothing and pretended to sleep, but he couldn't close his eyes that night. And for the first time in a long time, he thought of his mother, of her voice, of the way she called him "my little boy," even when he was taller than her, of her rice pudding, of how she laughed at old black and white sitcoms, of how she touched his forehead when he was sick, and of how she used to tell him, "Nobody will ever care for you like I do." He wanted to call her, but he didn't. Maggie, for her part, expected nothing. There was no longer any tenderness in her waiting, only planning. She visited offices, made calls, and activated the immigration clause. She declared David's transactions as suspicious. The system was slow, but it activated. An international alert was issued for his return to the United States. They wouldn't put him in jail, but they would make him accountable. In the red notebook, Maggie wrote, "There is no justice more complete than that which is delivered without screaming. I will watch him lose everything without lifting a finger. Karma is not paid with violence. It is served with patience." And so the second betrayal didn't break her. It converted her into something stronger, colder, freer. The mother died in her, but the woman awoke. It was only a matter of days until David returned to the U.S., and he had no idea of the earthquake that was waiting for him. David believed that hell was a place with fire, punishment, and screams. He didn't imagine it could be as cold as the cobblestone streets of Paris, or as humiliating as a card being declined in a restaurant full of tourists. It all started with a denial at the payment terminal. Then another and another. In less than 48 hours, he found himself empty-handed. No cash, no active accounts, and with two women looking at him as if he were a beggar they had just picked up off the street. Sarah yelled at him in the middle of the street in front of dozens of people who stopped to stare. "You shameless fool! What did you do with the money? I told you not to trust your poverty-stricken mama. Now you've ruined us all." David tried to speak, but there weren't enough words to explain what he didn't even understand. He only knew something was wrong, that the accounts were frozen, that his name had been linked to an international financial fraud investigation, and that he had to report to the American embassy the next day. That night, Linda looked at him with a mixture of contempt and annoyance. "I warned you, Sarah. This poor boy isn't even good for washing dishes. I'm going to a hostel. I'm not sleeping in this dump." Sarah followed her. Not a word, not a goodbye. David stayed in the hotel room alone with a half-empty suitcase and the buzz of betrayal echoing in his ears. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Maggie was weaving the last threads of her plan like a winter blanket. Everything fit. Every movement made sense. William helped her gather the necessary documents to activate the International Capital Block, relying on the complaint of fraudulent use of an elderly person's accounts. He contacted an old acquaintance, Mr. Garcia, a federal agent in the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and managed to activate an alert for illicit fund withdrawal, which implied a mandatory review upon David's entry into U.S. territory. It wasn't revenge. There was no hate. There was justice. In her red notebook, she wrote, "Sometimes a mother's love also has to hurt, not out of hate, but for a lesson, because what is allowed is repeated, and what is repeated rots. I didn't give birth to a thief, but the world turned him into one. And if I have to be the one to stop him, so be it." Beverly accompanied her in silence through many of those procedures. She was no longer just her neighbor. She had become her accomplice. "Doesn't it hurt, Maggie?" "Of course it hurts. It hurts like tearing off my own skin. But there are pains that heal." The meeting at the embassy was a spectacle of shame for David. They made him go into a cold, windowless room with a young lawyer and a translator who spoke in a mechanical tone. They explained that there was an active complaint in the U.S. that the funds had been frozen by a preemptive order, and that he had to account for them upon his return. David left with a defeated face. He felt everything crumbling. He thought of his mother. For the first time in a long time, he thought of her voice, her look, and he knew that all of this came from her. And then, like a lost child, he dialed her number. "Mom," he said as soon as she answered. On the other end of the phone, Maggie was in her kitchen cleaning black-eyed peas with the old strainer as if nothing unusual were happening. She recognized the voice immediately. Her hand trembled, but not enough to drop the phone. "Mom, what did you do? They took everything from me. I'm alone. Sarah left. Linda too. They say you did this." Maggie stayed silent, took a deep breath, and then replied, with a serene, firm voice, as if speaking from a place David could no longer access. "I didn't take anything from you, son. I just stopped what you were taking from me." "Mom, they want to arrest me. You said you would always be there for me." "I was, until you stopped being there for yourself. Please help me. I don't know what to do." "Learn." She hung up. She gave him nothing more. No tears, no apologies, no explanations. It was the first time she allowed herself to think that her son needed to suffer to understand. Because sometimes pain teaches more than love. That night, Maggie didn't sleep. Not out of anguish, but because she sat down to write him a letter. It wasn't a farewell. It was an emotional testament, a letter she would leave in the red notebook. On the last page, it was for him, for when he returned. "My dearest David, you were my reason for getting up every morning. You were my fight, my strength, my pride, I gave you what I had and what I didn't. I denied myself food, rest, and company for you. And I don't regret it. I did it with love. But you forgot who you were. You surrounded yourself with ghosts in expensive perfume. And in their eagerness to kill me while I was alive, they forced me to wake up. I don't hate you. I couldn't. But I am no longer the woman who waits in silence for her son to remember her. Now I am the one who teaches you even if it hurts. And if you ever truly repent, this letter will be here. Not to save you, but so you can't say no one warned you. At the end of the letter, she drew a small heart. It was the sweetest thing she had left. David wandered the streets of Paris aimlessly. He slept in cheap hostels. Sometimes he ate, sometimes he didn't. He had nobody to call. Neither Sarah nor Linda answered. And he knew that his return to the U.S. wouldn't be a landing. It would be a crash. Finally, he took a return flight, scared, ashamed, with cold in his bones. He knew they were waiting for him, not with hugs, but with outstanding debts. Maggie, for her part, was ready. Her health was deteriorating, but her soul was clearer than ever. She had shaved her head before the chemo could take her hair. She did it in her bathroom with sewing scissors. She looked in the mirror and said, "Now I look like who I am." William accompanied her to her last doctor's appointment. The doctor confirmed that the cancer was advancing rapidly. She nodded. "You know," she said, "I was never afraid to die. What hurt me was not being able to leave in peace. But now I know I will leave with everything settled." That night in her bed alone, Maggie felt a sharp pain in her chest. She doubled over, but she didn't call anyone. She just hugged herself, murmuring her son's name, not as a complaint, but as a farewell. The silence of the storm was just that, the exact moment before the collapse, the feigned calm that precedes the inevitable. But Maggie didn't fear the end because she had done what she had to do, and David was about to face the debris of the life he himself destroyed. When the plane landed in the U.S., Maggie felt no emotion. She wasn't surprised by the captain's welcome or the strange language mixed with the airport announcements. She didn't care about the glass ceilings or the foreign faces. She hadn't traveled to admire anything. She had traveled to close a cycle, not as a mother, but as a witness. At almost 70 years old, her body was trembling, yes, but not with fear. The physical pain was already part of the scenery. What sustained her was purpose. She had sold a few things to pay for that ticket. The blender, the large mirror in the living room, and a ring she kept since David was a child. She didn't regret it. The cost was insignificant compared to the emotional freedom she sought. At the airport, William was waiting for her. He had arrived a day earlier to prepare everything. He had pulled strings, processed the permits, and arranged for Maggie to be present at the embassy when David testified. It wasn't legally required, but the consular official was an old friend and also the son of a single mother. He understood the request without needing too many explanations. When he saw her arrive, William removed his hat. "You don't look like a woman who is about to face her son. And you don't look like a retired lawyer," Maggie replied without looking directly at him. "Are you sure about this?" "I'm alive. That's enough." They walked to the car. During the ride, William tried to ease the tension with a few anecdotes, but Maggie didn't engage. She wasn't there to converse. She had one last task. In her purse, she carried a thick yellow envelope with items that weren't of material value, but held eternal weight. Meanwhile, in a hotel room on the other side of the city, David stood in front of the mirror. His eyes were sunken, his beard was messy, and his expression swung between exhaustion and panic. He was going to present himself at the American embassy to sign an official declaration that would separate him from the joint accounts with his mother. But he also knew that by doing so, he would admit he had managed those accounts with false documentation. In exchange, the embassy had agreed not to arrest him, but to register him on an economic watch list, and his return to the U.S. would be conditional. He would have to present himself before a financial authority upon stepping on American soil. When he went down to the hotel lobby, he saw Sarah waiting for him. She wore dark sunglasses and a red coat that looked borrowed. Her face didn't reflect love or resentment, only convenience. "You're late," Sarah said with annoyance. "I didn't know you were coming." "You also didn't know you were so useless, and here we are. What do you want?" "To see you fall." David clenched his fists. What she said no longer hurt him. What hurt was having allowed himself to be molded by a woman who considered him disposable. Upon arriving at the embassy, the officials led them into a white, silent, waiting room with metal chairs. Sarah chewed gum as if she were in a shopping mall. David sweated. Every minute weighed like an hour. Then the door opened and Maggie entered. She wore a gray sweater, a long skirt, and a dark blue scarf over her shoulders. Her now sparse hair was covered with a black bandana. She walked slowly but straight. She held the yellow envelope in her hands. When she crossed the room, her eyes met David's. He suddenly stood up. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I came to watch you sign, not as a mother, as a witness." Sarah let out a harsh laugh. How sweet. The old woman came to put on her final show. Maggie looked at her, not with hate, but with pity. "You took everything she had," she said in a low voice, "but I taught him what he'll never have again. Forgiveness." Sarah scoffed. "Forgiveness, ma'am? Your son is a failure. You raised a parasite. No, I raised a good boy. You turned him into this, and he let you do it." David closed his eyes. He couldn't take it anymore. "Mom, I don't know when I lost myself." Maggie approached, handing him the envelope. "Here are your photos. The first one's from when you learned to walk and write. Here's your first letter to Santa Claus. Once, you asked me for a bicycle and I told you only if you got an A in math, and you did. I kept my promise, son." David took the envelope, his hands trembling. "And here is also the letter I wrote you, not to save you, but so you can't say no one. Warned you." They sat down. The embassy official came in and explained the procedure. David signed. At that moment, the camera of an American tourist waiting for his passport recorded part of the final dialogue. The images showed Maggie standing, her eyes moist, saying, "You were my life, but I was never yours. Today I understand. You weren't born to love me, only to serve as my mirror." The recording was uploaded to social media that same day. In a few hours, it went viral. People commented from all over. "That mother is a queen. That's how you teach a lesson without violence." Dignity doesn't age. David couldn't lift his head. The official looked at him with compassion. "All done. You can go. Your mother, too." Sarah had already left. She didn't wait for anyone. She stormed off just as she had arrived, without apology, without a soul. On the way back to the hotel, Maggie and David walked in silence down a narrow street in Paris. On a corner, she stopped. "This is where we part ways." "Mom," he tried to say, but his voice broke. "I gave you everything I had, even my silence. Now I give you the only thing you refuse to accept, the truth. Will you forgive me?" "I already forgave you. The problem is that you haven't forgiven yourself yet." "Can I do anything?" "Yes. Live with what you did and make it count for something." Maggie turned and walked away slowly. She never saw him again. That night, David opened the envelope in his room. The photos were yellowed but intact. The letter written in blue ink smelled of lavender. When he finished reading it, the world crashed down on him. He knelt on the floor and cried as he hadn't cried since he was a child. Not from punishment, but from shame, and he knew he had lost something he couldn't recover, the dignity of a mother. And that justice, when it comes from the one who loved you most, is the hardest of all. David returned to the U.S. in silence, without suitcases, without promises, without glory. He passed through customs like a ghost. No cameras, no family waiting. For him, no one asking about him. The only things he brought with him were the yellow envelope with his childhood photos and the letter his mother had left him. The rest, he had lost everything. The Los Angeles airport felt grayer than ever. The air was heavy, dense, as if his guilt floated in the atmosphere. He had nowhere to go. Sarah wasn't answering calls. His mother-in-law had blocked all his contacts, and his former office colleagues pretended not to recognize him. He had been exposed on social media, mocked by thousands, branded as the ungrateful son who stole from his mother to take his wife and mother-in-law to Europe. He walked the streets of the neighborhood where he grew up. South Central was the same. The same potholes, the same graffiti on the walls, the same street vendors selling goods at dusk. But something inside him was no longer the same. Every street had an echo, a memory, a reproach. He passed his old school. He remembered when his mother walked him hand in hand, her apron smelling of bleach and her shoes worn down. She always said, "You won't live scrubbing floors like me. You'll have your own desk and your suit." And he had it for a while, until he exchanged it for lies. Maggie was already back. She had returned alone. She didn't need company. She had lived her whole life in the company of her silence, and it didn't weigh on her. She settled back into her house with cracks in the walls, the same concrete floor, and the rocking chair that creaked when she swayed. She settled into her life like someone returning to the place they should never have left. William brought her medicine. Beverly prepared light soups for her. The closest neighbors looked after her in spontaneous shifts. Not because she asked for it, but because dignity is also honored while one is alive. She became a neighborhood legend. Some children thought she had traveled to punish the wicked, others that she was a witch, others that she had faced the mob. Only a few knew the truth, and they said nothing. Maggie didn't speak much. She listened to jazz music in the afternoons. Sometimes from the doorway she watched the neighborhood children play. She laughed with them. She gave them lollipops, listening intently when they told childhood lies. She had recovered her peace, but not her strength. The cancer was advancing slowly but steadily. Every week she seemed more fragile. Her clothes were too big. Her hands trembled more. But she never stopped walking around her house. She never let herself fall. One Sunday morning, David walked to the door. He carried a bag with donuts. He had spent the whole night wondering if he should go. He hadn't slept or eaten, but something inside him demanded it. He didn't expect her to open the door. He just wanted to see her, to see if she was still breathing. From the opposite sidewalk, he saw her sitting in her rocking chair. She wore an old sweater and a shawl draped over her shoulders. Her face was thin, but not defeated. She smiled at some children playing nearby. One of them brought her a flower picked from the park, and she hugged him as if he were her own blood. David didn't cross the street. He just watched her. He felt a knot in his throat, walked slowly, left the bag of donuts on the porch, and left. Maggie didn't look up, but she felt him. She didn't open the door. Not that day. Over the following weeks, David returned, always at the same time. He left something, flowers, pastries, a note without a name. He never dared to knock. He never asked to enter. He had no right. He was just paying without knowing if the debt would ever end. One night, Maggie picked up her red notebook, opened it to the last page, and with a trembling hand, wrote her final note. It wasn't long, just enough, just like her. My son, love is not demanded, it is given, and if you have learned that, then you are not lost anymore. Don't look for me when I'm gone. I will be in every mistake you choose not to repeat. In every act of kindness you do, without expecting anything in return. If you want to forgive yourself, start with others. And if you ever manage to see your mother in the eyes of another woman, don't fail her. That will be my redemption." She signed with her full name. She folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and wrote in black ink, "For David." The morning she stopped breathing was bright. The sun streamed through the windows. On her lap were the red notebook, the envelope, and a blanket, knitted by her own hands. The neighbors found her surrounded by flowers that the children had left. Her face held a serenity that few can fake. There was no drama, no screaming, only the calm after the storm. William arrived first. He looked at her in silence, gently closed her eyes. He didn't cry. He knew she didn't want tears. He knew she had died as she lived, with dignity. Beverly prepared the wake with the help of the neighbors. It was humble but full of love. They didn't accept elaborate wreaths, only flowers from the park, children's drawings, and the songs she loved to listen to. David wasn't notified, but he knew. He knew the moment the wind changed and something in his chest went out. He ran to the house, saw the open door, and walked in slowly. There were candles in the living room. Nobody stopped him. Nobody hugged him. He went to his mother's body. He knelt down. He touched her hands. They were cold. Next to her, he found the envelope with his name. He opened it. He read every word aloud, alone, in a whisper. He cried, but not like before. He cried in silence like her. In a corner of the room was an open wooden box. Inside, a photo of him as a child, with a handwritten note on the back. "I still believe in you, son." David took the photo, pressed it against his chest, then went out to the yard and sat in the chair where she used to sit. He looked up at the sky and understood that he had lost his mother, but perhaps he could still find himself. Days later, the neighbors said that the man who came with donuts stayed living in the house. He had no new furniture or luxuries, no visitors, only an old chair, a red notebook, and a photo on the shelf. Those who leave make space. Those who stay sometimes fill it with memory, and sometimes with redemption. Did you enjoy this story? Let me know which city you're listening from in the comments. If this story moved you, please show your support so I can continue bringing you more stories like this. Thank you for your kind support. I look forward to reading your thoughts about this story. On the screen, you can see 2 more life stories that I highly recommend. There's much more content on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.